everyone! Welcome back to my channel. I'm Laura, and in today's video I wanted to focus on the behavioral interview and really how to highlight your soft skills when you're answering these kinds of questions. There are a lot of technical videos about lead coding and passing the tech interview, but I did want to set aside some time just to talk about behavioral interviews. Now, I know the common sentiment about behavioral interviews is that people usually like to wing them, myself included in the past. But I think the behavioral interview can really be a deal breaker or a tiebreaker in other instances about whether or not to bring a candidate on board and to extend you an offer. This video will really just dive into different types of behavioral questions that you'll encounter, but throughout the video I also want you to think about the 4 key soft skills that you should be bringing with you into an interview, and well, just everyday life. Those are going to be communication, confidence, humility, and a willingness to learn. The first question to start out with is going to be, tell me about yourself. This will usually be the opener for every interview, regardless if it's a behavioral one, or recruiter screening, or a technical interview. They really just want to know the basics of who you are, what you want, and what you're looking for. And that should also structure the basis of your answer. Succinctly summarize in about 1 or 2 minutes who you are, what your background is, what your skills and experiences are like, and also why you're moving forward with this company and what this company can potentially offer you with respect to your career goals. It's a quick time for you to sell yourself and get the interviewer excited about why you're interviewing with them and know what they can be looking out for when they are interviewing you for the next couple of minutes. I always get pretty nervous about the tell me about yourself because there are kind of more stakes riding on it than you expect. If you do a great job, then it gives you some confidence moving forward because you have gotten into the interviewer's good graces and they like who you are overall as a person. But on the other hand, if you're fumbling around for answers and you don't really know what exactly you're looking for, then that can also negatively carry into future questions where the interviewer can start to expect less and less of you. All in all, no pressure, just, ace every question in the interview all the time. Realistically, no one can do that though, and everyone will have their good and bad days. So I would recommend just really being prepared with the tell me about yourself question, so it never really throws you off guard. Here are some concrete tips on crafting your answer. The first is to make it sound like a story. You can think of it like you're selling a product where the product is you and you as an interviewee. With a product, you're usually asking, why is this useful, why is it relevant, and how is it going to benefit my life? You can pretty much apply the same thing to you as a candidate of how are you going to be a useful employee, what skills you bring to the table, and why should we overall hire you instead of any other candidate off the street. If you think about it, every story has a good hook and exposition, a solid whatever the middle piece is called, and also an ending that makes them want to read more or learn more about whatever it is being told. Now that begs the question of what interesting parts of your life can you summarize into a 1 to 2 minute story, and how can you really catch the interviewer's attention to make them want to learn more about you and your background. The second tip is to strike a balance between confidence and humility. No one likes someone who is a bragging know-it-all, but also no one is going to be really encapsulated by someone who is super shy and not really outspoken. You also definitely want to highlight your skills and achievements here though, because again, you're selling yourself and the kinds of things that you're capable of. The third tip is to know why you applied for the specific role and company. We'll dive into this more later in the video, but your ending is really going to summarize why you are applying for this role or company. The ending of your story is going to be all about why you're here interviewing for this company. So you better be able to have a good sell of why you're here and what this company can offer you. Now let's talk mistakes. I have a handful of mistakes that I've made here. There are a lot of mistakes that I made here, and the first one I want to highlight is to not read literally from a script. I do recommend that you write your answer all out so you have a very clear and concise expectation of what you're looking for, and to rehearse it so it becomes a natural flowing sounding story. But if you're not feeling confident, you're probably going to get tempted to just read directly from the script, which I did, and trust me when I say that it just sounds like a sad robot, like I mentioned earlier. 2 is to never wing it. I've done this in the past, and again, this just leaves me with a negative momentum going into the interview. I feel disorganized, I feel jumbled, and my interviewer also has no idea what I've really spent the past 3 minutes talking about. The third and last mistake to avoid is to not blabber on forever. If you're a little bit too excited about talking about yourself and everything that you've done in the past year, then it's going to be hard for the interviewer to follow and they will quickly lose your attention. The second set of questions you'll encounter is the tell me about a time when X, Y, Z. These are going to be questions that ask you to really dig into your past and tackle some tough conversations. These questions are really going to dig into your collaboration skills, teamwork, conflict resolution, everything that comes to light in a day-to-day work scenario. The most important thing that you can do to prepare for any kinds of these questions is to just have 2 to 5 stories in your back pocket that you can always rely upon. 2 to 5 is a pretty wide range, but it really just depends on the kinds of stories that you're bringing with you. Some stories can be incredibly versatile and have a lot of nuance that you can repurpose for different questions all the time. Some other stories may be very particular and targeting a very specific situation that you might get asked. I definitely don't have a totally prescriptive list of what questions you should be practicing for. However, I do find that the Amazon's 14 Key Principles are a great and fantastic resource as a starting point. If you just look up Amazon Leadership Principles, you'll be redirected to an Amazon page that describes each of these principles in a little bit more depth. But generally speaking, I find that they're a really good guide and will cover the vast majority of questions that you can ever be asked in a behavioral interview, and you can feel confident going into these interviews because you have all your bases covered. For a succinct way to prepare this, I recommend making a spreadsheet with all the principles listed on the left side and filling in a story for each of these principles. There you can see where your gaps are and where you need to kind of dig deeper and find a different story for, and you can also constantly come back and change these stories as they become more or less relevant and you have better experiences. You don't have to write out the whole story, of course, just a quick summary of what happened in the story, as well as how it may link to the principle in question. Now let's get on to the tips. The first tip is to pick versatile stories. This will make it easier to remember, and because you're always pulling from the same stories all the time, you'll become a natural when you're referring back to each of these stories with a different principle. It also allows you to memorize fewer things, so there's less cognitive work on you there. Second is to just practice these stories. It doesn't even have to be in a mock interview, it can just be literally you rehearsing these stories. Again, familiarity is key, and the more fluently you're able to tell these stories, the better off the impression will be on the interviewer. The mistakes here, though, can be pretty deadly. The first thing to definitely avoid is to go off topic. When you have versatile stories, it can be pretty easy to get lost in the details and the weeds and not really have the forest that you're aiming for ahead of you. Remember what the interviewer actually asked you and whether they're hammering on collaboration or conflict resolution. You'll probably highlight a different part of your story then. Really focus on making the story relevant to the question, not vice versa. Second is just the lack of preparedness. In the past, I never actually created that Excel spreadsheet grid that I mentioned, but that is a game changer when it comes to actually knowing exactly what you need to cover and where your gaps are. Without knowing what story aligns to which principle or what kinds of questions, it can be really easy to get lost and try to prepare for every single behavioral question that comes your way. That's overwhelming, and there's not enough mental energy or time in the day to actually get through every single behavioral question that can be thrown your way. Try to find ways in which you can minimize the amount that you have to actually prepare by efficient strategies like gridding and grouping by principles. The third set is the what would you do if X, Y, or Z happened. These hypothetical questions are always pretty hard because you may not have necessarily been in the exact scenario, but you can kind of approximate or share similar experiences, of course. You'll often find that there's not one clear or right answer in these scenarios. Every hypothetical situation will likely be some sort of conflict or awkward scenario, so the more that you can really highlight and over-communicate, the better the scenario will often end up. I often find that these embarrassing, awkward, or conflicts arise because of lack of communication, so if you can really hammer in on the over-communication part, then you'll probably be in a good spot. The second tip is just to really try to place yourself into the scenario. You obviously won't know all the context, and in the real world, you never really do. Just try to think seriously about if you were in the scenario, how would you actually react, what is your gut instinct, and how can you kind of refine that gut instinct into a better interview answer. As far as mistakes go, I don't really have much advice here because I haven't answered this question too many times, and the few times that I have answered this question haven't been the best. So you probably will have more experience than me in this area, let's be honest. And all that being said, let's move on to the last and final question of why this company or why this role. This really just falls onto you to do a little bit of background research. Make sure that this company and role that you're applying for aligns with your goals, and you have a very clear idea in your head of why you actually applied for this position in the first place now that you're in the interviewing stages. You'll often be asked this in a recruiter screening as well, because this can help weed out people who aren't actually passionate about the posting or the job and just happen to wander upon the posting and give it a shot. And even if this does sound like you, I bet that there are still things that you can find that do make you excited about the posting, the company, or the overall job. The tip here is to just do a research an hour or so before your interview, so everything is fresh and at the top of your mind. Go do a deep dive into the company's products, and specifically if you do know what team you might be interviewing on, try to figure out what they're working on. If you do have a little bit more of a lead time and time to prepare, and this is maybe a dream company for you, it would be a great idea then to connect with some of the people working on teams or products that you're interested in and really get to know what they're working on and why it's impactful and why you might fit in with the company or team. This can really help you stand out, and the more notes and references that you have to something specific and concrete, the better off you'll be and the more passionate you'll seem about the job and the position. If you just give general things
like, there are great people working here, the people here are really smart, and you guys make great products,
then it's not really a great impression and shows that you haven't bothered to do any research into the company specifics at all. This can also be grounds for elimination in early interview rounds because they really just want to know people who are excited and interested about the work that is being done at the company, not randoms that just applied to apply. That is the behavioral interview roundup. I have done a lot of behavioral interviews in my past, and I'm sure that there are many in my future that I still have to prepare for and get a better grasp on. I know that all of us can do a little bit better in the behavioral interview, so hopefully that you take this time to reflect and figure out what areas you're lacking in with respect to these 4 major areas for behavioral interviews. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll answer them as quickly as I can. I hope everyone has a great week, and I'll see you all again next week for a brand new video. Bye.